Hello everyone, this is Oni Onyabor. I'm with Pro-Lit-Fic and my work is to help people attain higher consciousness through creativity. And today's video topic is the 7 great structures. Now, before I dive into the 7 great structures and specifically what it is I'm talking about, because this will be sort of the framework, the backbone of a lot of what I'm saying, right? Because we'll see that in the world there's these reoccurring numbers, right? And a lot of that will be like 1, 3, 5, 7, 12 are a lot of things that recur. So that's the number of days we have in a week, the amount of months we have in a year, the amount of hours in a day, like so on and so forth. There's so many ways we see these numbers cycle through, right? And talking about the 7 great structures, in order to really contextualize it, I really wanted to pull into this idea of duality, right? And not in terms of good and bad, but think in terms of light and dark. Now, there's this story about 2 wolves. It's an old Native American tale about these 2 wolves that are doing eternal battle over the human soul, right? And there's one wolf that is made of light, and it's white and it's pure light, and the other is a dark wolf, right? And they're fighting and tearing at each other. And the question is asked, which of these wolves will win? And the answer to the question in the tale is the one you feed. And now, what I'm here when I'm talking about the 7 great structures, I want you to imagine that winning or losing is not about one wolf defeating the other, but the idea of the wolves becoming one, when the light wolf and the dark wolf no longer see themselves as light and dark, but simply to another side of the same wolf, right? It's when these integration happens, that's what we're going for. So it's not about feeding the light wolf more than the dark wolf or the dark wolf more than the light wolf, but allowing both to live in such a way when they no longer fight, but learn to live and work together in harmony. And that's the idea of raising to this higher consciousness. So what specifically are the 7 structures when we talk about how to do that and how to build our virtues, right? Now, the 7 structures, there's a lot of different ways to go about them, right? So you have, and I'll probably throw up some things that we can analyze. So there's some frameworks we can use like the Kabbalah. There's some other frameworks like the basic human needs. And we'll dive into the depth of those different frameworks, but I really just want to use a really super basic one that is common among most Christian theologians, and that starts from the ideas of the 7 sins. So if you guys know the 7 sins, you have the sin of pride, the sin of envy, the sin of greed, the sin of gluttony, the sin of lust, the sin of wrath, and then finally the sin of sloth. And these are the 7 great sins, right? And the idea is these sins, what have been known in sort of Christian theology, they also have a counterpoint that exists within them. And this is essentially what is that trait when it is fully evolved, not into a sin or to a stumbling block, but rather into a stepping stone and into a virtue, right? So joy would then evolve from sloth, right? And envy would then evolve into faith. You would have gluttony, which then evolves into a level of leadership. Lust revolves into wholeness. And then we have wrath, which then becomes holiness or righteousness. We have greed, which becomes charity. And finally, you have pride, which eventually evolves into truth. And those are the 7 basic structures, and that's sort of the overview. And oftentimes, as I speak in many other videos, I'll be referencing this video just to sort of help you guys kind of understand that basic thing. But those are the 7 structures, and I think this is a great framework where if you can understand how each of these aligns up with different parts of ourselves, you can often diagnose and find ways to conquer and as well as evolve in the stage we're stuck in, right? And so kind of starting out with that framework, before I go any further, Before I go any further, if you like what you're hearing, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second. It makes a massive difference. And if you know anyone who may benefit from this message, don't hesitate to share it. It's word of mouth referrals like these that make spreading the message vital and help the channel grow, and so that I can help more people. So, moving on to this final point, we talk about essentially the idea of these, in the Hawkins scale, right, which I'll kind of bring up here, you're going to notice there's a bunch of different emotions, right? Now, in the Hawkins scale, at the bottom you have shame, guilt, apathy. Those are down at the bottom, right? And then at the higher end, you have enlightenment, you have peace, you have joy. And it's sort of like all these emotions, right? All the way up. Now, oftentimes when people are looking at the world in this sort of dualistic right or wrong way, the idea is that we just think, well, it's important to just get higher up on the scale, right? So if I want to have higher consciousness, the idea is like, I just want to feel peace and joy and happiness. But that's not exactly how it works. As you attain higher consciousness, what that means is that you can contain lower consciousness emotions and ideals, but when you have lower consciousness, you can't attain higher conscious ideals. So what does that mean? It means that someone who is of a high consciousness can still feel guilty. They can still feel apathy. They can still feel indifference. They can still feel anger. They can feel all these emotions coming all the way up the scale. But if you were, say, to reverse that and move that consciousness into a lower form, like someone who's stuck in like the lower vibrations of guilt and shame and apathy, they can't feel these higher level emotions of joy and peace and all that stuff unless they attain that level of consciousness. Now, we're all able to go in and up and around the board, right? Because when we're born, we start high. Most children just come out the gate, they're high consciousness. And it's only as we spend time in the world that we get dragged down into lower consciousness. So the idea then is, how do we upend this? How do we grow through that? And the idea is learning and gaining mastery of the emotions in every single stage, right? So a lot of times I've grown up in some circles where a lot of people, especially in a lot of religious sectors, will say that anger, for instance, is a bad emotion, and they'll be like, anger's bad, like anger should not be felt, and if you feel anger, that's a sign of the devil, or that's a sign of something wrong. But anybody who, can use a level of common sense recognizes that anger exists as an emotion, and if it exists in the universe, it's not because it's inherently evil or bad. The universe doesn't just create things with no purpose, right? There's a purpose in anger. So throughout the series, as we're talking about the different emotions and the 7 different structures, what I hope to do is illustrate what are the purposes of every single emotion we feel, as well as how does that emotion play out as we evolve our consciousness in one of the different structures, right? So say, for instance, we start with the very first structure, the most fundamental structure that's starting in our root chakra, is, you could call the sin of like sloth, the spectrum of sloth over here and joy over here, right? You could call this the spectrum of enthusiasm or energy, right? And so one might start being very lazy and lethargic, and the idea is, as we work through and evolve this feeling, if one is trapped in these lower vibes, feeling anger might actually be an evolution of that feeling, right? So anger is actually the next step towards evolving that. So for instance, if I'm very lethargic in a bad family and I'm inundated with hopelessness, then one day I start to feel angry and I begin to act out on that anger. And then because I act out on that anger, I move away and build a new life. That was actually a good thing for me. Even though by some people, their standard emotion, anger might be a downgrade in what they normally feel, right? So we just have to understand that our progress, even though there's this sort of absolutists in the sense of the vibration and the truth of the emotions. We have to understand that there's a relativity to how we interact with all of those. So we can't ascertain the journey of others until we understand our own journey. And even then, it's not really in our place to judge, right? And I think that's a lot of peace comes from just understanding that. Anyway, so again, a lot of the time what you're going to be hearing throughout this series, if you watch this video, it's really just understanding that you have the light wolf over here and the dark wolf over here, right? And so over here you have joy, and over here you have sloth. Over here you have pride, and over here you have truth. And there's all these different emotions that we feel as we move from the lower part, which you might call pride, and evolve to a place where we live within truth and full integrity of ourselves, right? Or with wrath, right, we might just display that in the sort of lowest level vibration ideal of that, but then as it evolves, it then moves into a sense of righteousness and holiness, right? And so using this video as a sort of foundation, we'll be putting other videos out in the future to kind of talk about that. And a lot of it is just understanding that ideal, that the negative parts of ourselves oftentimes, when understood and embraced, evolve into our highest virtues. And that's really the lesson for today. And something I want to talk about is just as we learn to feed the right wolves, both wolves in the time, we'll come to see that it was the same wolf all along. Now, before I end the video, I just want to say thank you for your time. And if there are any of you out there in need of help and guidance for unlocking greater creativity, why don't you book a time with me in the link down below, and I can help you work towards your goals. I have a growing wait list of clients, but I love to connect with people, and so I can better assist you. And also, like I said before, if you find anything in this video helpful, please feel free to share with people, as well as don't hesitate to like and subscribe. It helps make a huge difference in helping the channel grow. Anyway, thanks so much for coming and listening to this time. Remember, to embrace the light is also to embrace the dark, and it's only in understanding this we can move on to a better, higher version of ourselves. So spread the message of higher consciousness through your own creativity, and remember, stay happy, stay healthy. Peace.